Welcome to Live Players, where political scientists and strategists Samo Burja and I discuss the key individuals with the power to alter our current society. Every week, we provide analysis of the news and case studies of live players as well as key institutions and technologies that make up the global power landscape. Let's dive in.
Sam, I want to talk about energy. People are talking a lot about energy in the context of AI and sort of different bottlenecks there. But I sort of want to just talk more broadly about the sort of importance of energy independence in the US and then also sort of the state of the current situation and the different dynamics there. Why don't you sort of open on this topic?
Well, of course, energy concerns are top of everyone's mind with the recent war in Iran that is still ongoing as of the recording of this episode. Unfortunately, I expect it's going to be ongoing for weeks more to come. Even if there is a ceasefire, the illusion of security in the Gulf monarchies and the export of oil and natural gas from the Persian Gulf has been shattered. Until now, you could imagine essentially there being a global economy still powered by the hydrocarbon reserves of the broader Middle East, but the geopolitical instability of the area and, frankly, the U.S. inability to impose stability or offer stability, uh, taking those together, I think the world should be searching for alternatives very quickly. And this, of course, includes the United States. The United States has had a fracking boom in many years, but it is mistaken to think that the U.S. having access to some oil for domestic consumption, being an exporter of natural gas, that that's actually true energy independence. Because at the end of the day, if there is a global recession, there is an American recession as well. We should be actively thinking to do two things: increase radically uh, the supply of energy in the United States, and the other one, replacing every single use of oil that we can. And frankly, at the end of the day, we should also be looking at expanding production. But that goes without saying. And I think that third point, it almost takes care of itself. No one's going to propose banning fracking if oil is at 150 or $200 per barrel.
Can you give kind of like a brief history of how we got here, or sort of the major events, so that people can understand sort of the state of play a bit better?
Well, we are now in a situation where the U.S. and Iranian decapitation strike in Iran was not so much a decapitation. Perhaps it actually multiplied the issue. The Iranian regime had a backup called, the Mosaic defense strategy. So decapitation turned out to be as ineffective as it would against a hydra. In the place of one head, you had 31 commanders all giving commands following pre-scripted attack strategies. Among those attack strategies was not just U.S. military bases, not just targets in Iran. It was also oil infrastructure among the Persian Gulf uh, oil producers, most notably again Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait. And at this point, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed, not not through mining or through boat attacks, but just straightforward application of drones. At this point, an oil tanker only crosses and leaves the Strait of Hormuz, leaving the Persian Gulf if allowed by Iranian forces, in which case maybe they're trading their oil in Chinese currency rather than US currency. Something that's, again, a troubling development because for the longest time now, we've had the petrodollar where all oil was traded in dollars, actually, to some extent, stabilizing global demand for dollars. The US could produce as many of those dollars as it wanted, and in fact, routinely did in recent years with the $1 trillion stimulus bills, the $1 trillion infrastructure bill with no infrastructure, etc. Now, I'm not saying that perhaps the straits won't reopen, but what is now baked in is an energy shock. Countries like Australia, Taiwan, even some European countries have only a few weeks of strategic oil reserves. Note these are close U.S. allies. It matters pretty directly for, say, the production of chips in Taiwan. The energy price in Taiwan matters for that. So this will affect the U.S. economy even if, for example, we were to ban the export of oil from the US in order to stabilize, you know, gas prices at the pump. But we're basically not going to do that. If we did that, that would be an even greater oil shock. So for now, oil will be exported from the US. Americans will just pay higher prices at the gas pump. If oil exports were restricted, there would just be a substitution where they would bid up things like Russian oil even higher. An important point here is that, of course, the Ukrainian government correctly understands this war to be a windfall for the Russian oil revenues. So they have proactively now attacked Russian oil infrastructure. It's possible that the Russian supply of the commodity, even with us temporarily removing or reducing sanctions on buying Russian oil, it's completely possible that total Russian oil production will also go down at the time when this is already bottlenecked. And any sort of proposals, like the possibility of invading Karg Island, that has been floated by some observers of the administration. Karg Island is a island in the Persian Gulf owned by the Iranian government, where most of their oil infrastructure resides. I mean, maybe this will hurt Iranian oil revenues, but again, just reduces global oil production. Normally, when refineries are hit by drones, which, mind you, happened a few years ago already, so this was quite predictable. You might remember a few years ago, Middle Eastern refineries were already being hit by terrorists, right, with drone weapons. So we know it was possible to destroy an oil refinery. So when we're talking about oil infrastructure, we're not just talking about free navigation of oil out of the Persian Gulf. We're talking about oil refineries that allow us to combine very heavy oil with light oil, basically make it ready for use in the global market. Oil, from Venezuela is not the same as oil from America, is not the same as oil from Saudi Arabia. They have different chemical properties, and you have to mix them at the right ratios. You have to refine them. Uh, It is different points, price points of refining and extracting the oil make sense, right? There's some oils that are viable and cheaper. There's certain things that only are really profitable if oil is very expensive. So there's a lot of complexity in global oil infrastructure, but oil fundamentally is the one globalized good. So truly, no matter how you think about it, coal is local, it's regional. You basically dig up a rock, you burn it. Gas is continental. You can ship it in a gas pipeline fairly efficiently. If you have to liquefy it and put it in a gas tanker, you already are paying a much higher price. Oil, however, it's like this wonderful burnable liquid. You mine it, it's physically easy to move onto a ship. It's easy to ship cheaply in an oil tanker anywhere in the world. You refine it, you have your fuel, which again is liquid fuel, again, easy to load and unload from a tanker, easy to store at room temperature, as long as you take precautions so the thing doesn't explode. And because of that, despite the geopolitical complications, oil is a commodity. It's a truly globalized good. Even when you have extreme measures like, say, banning the sale of Russian oil, we all know this has been partially substituted. Say, if India buys Russian oil, India will buy less Middle Eastern oil. So, maybe Westerners won't buy Russian oil, but instead they'll buy more oil from Saudi Arabia or even oil from Venezuela and other places. So really, it's sort of like you can play a game of musical chairs. You can certainly reduce revenue of oil producing countries. You can make it difficult for them to sell, but they'll do various things like, I don't know, Russia's well-known ghost fleet, right? Where they sail ships under the flags of other countries. There's, of course, a deeper history here, which is that, since the end of World War II, there's been a long history of the U.S. developing the oil resources of the Middle East. In fact, Britain did as well. And, honestly, this is where this whole problem started. The overthrow of the Shah in Iran in the 1970s sort of coincided with this first era of an awareness of how fragile and dependent the world had become on exports from the Persian Gulf. We already had an energy crisis. We already had an oil shock. I think we're now set in for a second oil shock. So I think it's globalization of oil, as in the price of oil dictates the rate of global economic growth, therefore affects the rate of just growth, economic growth for any country like China or the United States that is at all tied to the global market. I think that was baked in by the physics of oil. So really, to get off oil would mean a true energy deglobalization. But I think that's precisely what American energy independence would mean. It would mean not just American energy self sufficiency, which is very important. It would mean using US strategic oil exports to favorably subsidize allies of the US. And it would mean encouraging our allies to get off oil. Now, when I say get off oil, I don't mean a green energy project at all. It might actually involve burning way more coal or burning way more natural gas or encouraging countries to frack their reserves. Any means that can be used to essentially cap the price of oil or reduce the price of oil should be employed. And honestly, this should be a key U.S. strategic doctrine. I think the key U.S. strategic doctrine should be, for the next 10 or 20 years, to push the world towards an oil free or a less oil dependent world. That's the only way you're going to reduce the dependency of the global economy on the Middle East.
Can you give your explanation of how you make sense of this war to begin with, or sort of how do you situate it within, the context for it, et cetera?
I mean, we can of course talk about the war itself a little bit. I'll be honest. I don't think any observer knows exactly what's happening inside the Trump administration. It does seem to have been a decision by the administration. And, there are people who talk about, well, maybe the strikes on U.S. nuclear infrastructure that were carried out in January, maybe those were less effective than previously believed. There's sort of the Marco Rubio line that Israel was going to go ahead with this attack and that U.S. assets were going to be endangered if the U.S. did not join in on the attack, so that Israel would do this attack either way. There are claims that there was a genuine belief uh, by the administration, provided either due to U.S. intelligence or maybe intelligence provided by Israel, that the Iranian regime and government would fall. Now, to be clear, if the Iranian government did fall, it would still be destabilizing, but they probably would not close the straits. And the oil production of the Gulf Cooperative Council would have been uninterrupted. So it would have actually been not a quick, easy war, but there would have probably been some kind of Iranian civil war between the regime remnants, and whatever government was there. But its consequences would have been muted. That's not what happened, though. And I think that that's almost the most we can say. There's now talk of bringing about 10,000 U.S. troops into the Middle East. Needless to say, 10,000 troops is not enough to invade Iran. Probably would take something like 500,000 U.S. troops. Unclear if the U.S. can manage such logistics quickly, especially since there is some evidence that U.S. military bases have already endured significant damage from Iranian missiles and Iranian drones. So really, I don't know. I, I have a hard time seeing the Iranian government falling. I have a hard time seeing the U.S. committing to a full ground invasion. And because of that, I just think we're going to be stuck in this for a few weeks or months. Again, even if there's a ceasefire, no fundamental contradiction has been solved. Uh, you know, Israel's security position has not improved if Israel is driving the war. The U.S. has not managed to prevent or destroy the accumulation of enriched nuclear material. The attack, the a massacre of Iranian civilians, if this is in fact about protecting Iranian protesters, well, that's clearly not been avenged or contraindicated. And even any further developments or repairs in the oil infrastructure of the rich Gulf monarchies, that has to come now with a fundamental awareness that they're vulnerable. It turned out anti-air defenses were not good enough to prevent missiles from hitting them, and they were not good enough to intercept drones. So previously, the belief might have been that this infrastructure could be protected just with US air supremacy. So these countries, they have to start thinking about a new approach to security. And again, we could go even deeper into the Middle East and its history and how structurally our civilization became so dependent on oil exports there, or perhaps onto the roots of the conflict between Israel and Iran, or perhaps in the roots of the conflict between Iran and its current government and the United States, maybe about the Islamic Revolution. But I think we can save that for future episodes and maybe loop back to this question of energy independence, or actually a robust world where these regimes are disempowered because we got off oil.
That sounds like a good plan. Maybe you can start by how do you expect things to play out in the region as it might affect sort of how our energy situation.
Well, I think prices are going to go up. That's baked in. Insofar as the markets have not recognized this, I think the markets are just not being rational. I think a surprising amount of they're surprisingly difficult for markets to capture information that the average investor doesn't know or doesn't believe. In theory, smart money should be able to move this, but I think that there's a lot of incentive to just not start a recession, not start a depression. There are obviously political implications here. I mean, by this point, we all notice that the Trump administration times its strikes and its measures and its statements of a possible ceasefire with the markets closing and opening. In medieval Europe, perhaps people would stop fighting for Sunday to go to mass. I think today we perhaps do our fighting on the weekend where the markets are closed. And like right before the markets open, you put out a statement saying, actually, this war is already over. We're like making good progress in negotiation. You wait a few days, the markets close, you do some more bombing. I think it's kind of funny. But it really shows, though, that I think Iran has explicitly and correctly stated that the US president's weakness is actually markets. Like, not just this president, any US president pays close attention to markets. And I don't think any other US adversary has ever intentionally tried to just spike oil prices. Iran isn't even trying to make a lot of money selling its oil. It's not that worried about paying its soldiers. In fact, most of its economy is in the hands of the Shia clerics. So if the Shia clerics really need to, something like 30% of their economy can be used to temporarily pay the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is IRGC, which is the only organization that matters. So really, they're going to keep fighting, even if Iran totally loses its oil revenue for at least a while. And yeah, they're going to try to increase oil prices. I think they're targeting $200 per barrel, maybe $300. And again, we're already baked into an energy shock. There are countries like, I'm from Slovenia. Slovenia's already started rationing uh, gas at the pump. US allies, as I mentioned, Taiwan and Australia. There are places in Australia, medium-sized towns, they've just run out of diesel already. And, oil prices have already affected gas prices at the pump. Airline ticket prices are going up. If tomorrow a ceasefire is reached and oil production is restored, oil will still be more expensive than it was before the war. The only situation where I can imagine this not being the case is if the US basically loses the war. And the US just is like, hey, let's return to the situation before the war, but we're going to remove sanctions. In Iran, you can now trade your oil like a normal country. Now, maybe the president can sell this as a win, but strategically, that will be a US defeat, even if there's cheap oil. Because it would mean that, okay, instead of toppling a government, we've actually removed this decade-long sanctions package. It's going to be a government with more revenue, and it'll be a government that'll be able to industrialize. I mean, I think Iran makes something like 1 million cars a year. Like, they make their own cars, right? If open to global markets, Iran would start industrializing, and any security concerns Israel might have, or Gulf Arab countries might have, which, mind you, do not have good relations with Iran and have not for decades. all of that would just be made way worse in the long run. So actually, it's a bit of a pickle. I don't think this is a good situation at all for either the U.S. or its regional allies.
And so, what can be done about it, or how does how could the situation play out in a way that sort of leads to better outcomes? What do you think? What needs to be done here?
Well, I think I think militarily, the U.S. military needs to adapt very quickly. I'm just going to say it. This might be very unpopular, but I think we need to prepare for a multi-month war. I think we need to lean on Ukrainian expertise very heavily, and we need to very quickly redirect as much of the Department of War's budget as we can into effective and cheap drone and anti-drone measures. And actually deploy, if we have any special weapon systems that are anti-drone, that are supposed to work, we should deploy those. We should actually make the strait safe for ships with new technology. And, but that's such a tall ask. Like reforming the Pentagon in wartime, you would have to get in a real technocrat. It took Putin years of a dragged out war in Ukraine before he appointed someone with a math degree to run the Russian Department of Defense, right? With the Ministry of Defense. Um, I don't know. I don't think there's political capital for that. So to win the war, I think would mean to basically have a military that is fit for the 21st century. That's a pretty tall order. I think it could be done with Ukraine's help, possibly. But Ukraine is already using all of its capacities to go after Russia to sort of nullify it. So maybe there's a deal with Ukraine of some kind. Hey, build these drones very quickly, deploy them in the Gulf. Don't go after Russian oil infrastructure. We will reduce Russian revenue by reopening the Gulf. So maybe there's some sort of deal there. I honestly think, ironically, even Israel underinvested in drones. It, of course, had to invest in missile defense. But even the missile defense has hit its limits because, they're not being hit by drones, really. They're being hit by missiles. But I do think that drones are the most difficult question because even if you, destroy all the missiles, the Shahed drone is very easy to make and enough of them can sink a ship. It's that simple. So as long as, even if the missiles are exhausted, destroyed, the drones can keep interdicting ships. If the ships are interdicted, the oil price is high. If the price is high, then the cost to the U.S. economy is high. I think like a full invasion of Iran would be a very costly undertaking. I think it's possible we could win, but this is not friendly coastline. And this is a mountainous country. Now, it was possible to invade Iran, and was invaded by the Soviets and the British during World War II. It was, I think, technically a neutral country, but it was Axis friendly enough that they were worried about its oil even then, and the country could not fully resist and was jointly occupied by the Soviets and the British, and they set up their own interest zones there. Um, I don't think there's any proxy force that could invade. Just today, I was reading reports that, sort of the initial Kurdish attack of the few Kurdish rebel groups was already rebuffed. And again, like, how could the Kurds of Iraq or the Kurds of Iran defeat the Iranian military if Saddam Hussein's Iraq, fielding the Kurds could not do it? There was the Iraq-Iran war, lasted for 9 years. I do think a full U.S. invasion would succeed. But again, 500,000 U.S. troops. I think that requires a draft. Like, I'm not sure we can, like, that would mean pulling everything out of Asia and out of Europe. And it would still mean high casualties because the drone problem isn't solved. So again, I could see a way for us to innovate out of this over the next year or two. I think that would be a live player move to win the war. I see a way for us to take the L, lose this war, and try to fight the next war, right, which still involves a technical innovation. Or I could see us fighting this big war, but then we're stuck for another 10 years in Iran. Like in some way, we're going to have to keep military bases on at least the Iranian coast and stabilize whatever government is there and fight whatever Shia extremist insurgency ends up existing in the country. Again, the IRGC, it's like it's like the SS, or it's like a very radicalized, firmly ideologically committed military force. They are going to keep on fighting, right? They're going to keep on fighting even if we capture Tehran. There won't be an easy surrender there. And there'll be an insurgency. And yes, there is support for a secular, or at least not an Islamist government in Iran. For real, the urban population genuinely wants change. But to back that up, again, that's going to take 10 years of our involvement there. You can kiss any prospect of balancing China in Asia goodbye in that situation. It would take all of the US's strength to do that. It could do it, but in those 10 years, I think China could zoom ahead. We actually did a episode on how close China actually is to its own form of energy independence, and how actually China did the smart thing. They intentionally destroyed demand for oil. How? They subsidized electric vehicle production. Why is this smart? It's smart because it means that your population does not feel global oil shocks. Now, your companies still do. They're still tied to the world's economy, but commuting to work isn't unaffordable if you're just charging your electric car rather than if you're paying uh, more and more at the pump. $5 at the pump versus maybe one extra dollar on the electric bill you pay for charging your car. I think that sort of resilience of the living standards and the logistics of the general population, I think it was very smart of China to do that. And I think it's kind of crazy that, the green agenda is almost designed to make you more vulnerable to world energy shocks. Because you carry out the full green energy agenda, you are doing electrification, but you're also doing this intermittent power that requires peaker plants, that really, makes your grid more vulnerable to things like global gas prices. Already Europe, is taking a second hit. A lot of the liquefied natural gas they were buying to substitute Russian gas, they now can't buy that because that was sailing through, again, the Persian Gulf. It was sailing through the Red Sea. It was sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it's it's the case that green energy is not energy resilience. However, the fossil fuel people have ignored that electric cars are energy resilience and are energy independence. And frankly, maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe we can learn from this crisis just how important it is for the US to not be at the mercy of what happens with these petrostates, right? Like this invasion, if there was a real invasion or this air intervention, would have actually been much, much easier for us to endure politically had we been doing what was necessary to develop a domestic uh, energy system that is not dependent on these shocks at all.
Talk about the the hot take that you have, which is that this might be, not a short-term thing, but actually, a more longer-term thing. What is the different view that you have than the mainstream on this, and why are you confident in your view?
Well, I gave a more pessimistic take than I think is mainstream right now. But again, even if a ceasefire is signed, I think 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now, or a month from now, um, I suspect that it'll be the mainstream view. It'll be the view that we're in an energy crisis, in fact. This is currently still denied. Markets have slowly started to reflect this. Um, I think leadership, like committing to it until victory and doing what's needed for victory, I think that's not such a bad strategy. I know a lot of people, like in my in the extended commentary on X.com and among policy people, a lot of them just wish to leave and pretend this didn't happen. And if we leave and pretend this didn't happen, we might be restarting this war again in 6 months or a year with an emboldened Iran. So I think we have to commit to a deep reform of the military very quickly, and a deep reform of the US economy very quickly, and a change in our global energy policy very quickly. So if I have a view that's bullish, it's always the view that I always bet on live players. What could be done so the US wins this? I'm just taking it as a given that the US is not going to become friends with Iran. I'm not debating that. If that was going to happen, it could have already happened. I'm not even interested why we can't be friends. I'm just manifestly, that's where the premise starts, right? They are ideologically committed. That's true. They do have an irrational hostility. They do have a hostility to Israel that Israel can't really change, even if they did everything right. They have a hostility to the US that the US can't really easily make amends with or easily make a deal with. This has been going for 50 years at this point. I think it's literally it's hard for them to move away from that policy because, the Islamic revolution started as very anti-American and started as very anti-Israel. And they just kind of got stuck on that path. And then the conflict has only re-entrenched that from the current Iranian government over and over again. And the Iranian government is rational to not even trust the US. The US killed a lot of their leadership that was negotiating. Like that's okay, bridges are burned. I'm just going to say bridges are burned. So the optimistic take, the good take. Um, Again, we try to quickly develop the technology needed to fight in the age of drone warfare. This might make our legacy defense contractors and our Pentagon generals very sad, very unhappy. That's okay. Fire them. Fire them and work with whoever can actually deliver the goods. We're now a startup military. It's day one. We do not need aircraft carriers. I'm not sure I even believe the story aircraft carrier was damaged because of a fire in the laundry room. Like, I'm not sure I believe that. Governments, of course, do lie, and with good reason during war. I'm just going to go forward and assuming that they can sink our ships. I see no reason they could not sink our ships. Okay? It's day one. We're a naval power, and it turns out our ships are obsolete. What do we do? Both to win this war and win the next war and win the war after. Because again, even if we have a ceasefire right now, there will be another war with Iran. That's kind of baked in at this point. Uh, I think startups could handle this. I think US startups have a healthy enough ecosystem, but the reward needs to be you need to put your drone on a container ship or put your piece of technology into the military's hands as soon as possible. Have low-level officers immediately report on its effectiveness and immediately order more of whatever is being produced. So instead of a slow process where we're replanning our military, I think we should accept we have no idea what the next generation of warfare is, actually. The general's big-brained ideas clearly are not working. The admiral's big-brained ideas are not working. We have to be as humble as the Ukrainians were at the start of the war, and actually as humble as the Russians were once the Ukrainians helpfully killed all of their generals. The Russians actually have been adapting to this style of warfare. So, that's actually great for the U.S. defense sector. That's actually great for U.S. reindustrialization. It might not be good for the legacy companies, but it will be very, very good for whoever in the U.S. is ready and it was betting on, the new generation of American weapons being necessary. Maybe that's Anduril, maybe that's Palantir, maybe that's completely new companies. Because again, electronic countermeasures could be a good idea. Frankly, hacking at scale might be a very useful thing. AI-powered hacking might be an excellent countermeasure to piloted drones, potentially, right? They have onboard electronics that are off the shelf, that are commercial. I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure $1 trillion of the Pentagon's budget, if freed up, if we cancel these, broken ecosystem legacy architectures, I think a lot could be done in a few months and a whole lot more could be done in a few years. But moving aside from the need to completely revamp the US military, which again that's a full presidential term's worth of work, frankly, with the cooperation of Congress. So that's already, it could be done. especially if it's so important for us to win these wars. It could be done. So maybe let's just say this is what needs to be done. And if not, you're abetting Iran. Actually, that's pretty powerful. You can maybe do that. The other side is energy. I think it should be patriotic for Americans to drive. Basically, the patriotic thing to do now is to buy a US made electric car. Our enemies are targeting the price of oil at the pump. We can give some money to people, but what we really want is people to have and own the infrastructure of resilience. Actually remove any barrier we can to producing more electric cars, make it clear it's a national security issue right now to build these cars. Let's set a target to rapidly reduce the number of internal combustion vehicles on the road as fast as we can. Maybe the technology is, it's good enough. Teslas are good cars. Maybe the Chinese cars are better, but we're not going to buy Chinese cars. We have no reason to help them economically. They're a long-term bet. So a wartime industrialization includes transformation of the civilian infrastructure so that everyday Americans do not have to pay the price that our enemies would like to impose on us, right? And then number three, turns out it's not just important for us to build nuclear to win AI. It turns out it's important we build nuclear to win at war with Iran. So it is a national security crisis. It is an energy crisis. You declare it a national security issue, and you go out of your way to overrule local, every single local barrier to building new power plants. I would literally have a task group and I would daily name and shame Iranian collaborators. And I would also just maybe make it clear to our allies, hey, we are fighting a war domestically to build the energy infrastructure so we can keep on, hopefully, winning this war rather than, having to retreat from the Middle East with our tail between our legs. So that's sort of my optimistic one. It's sort of like, okay, people were speculating that maybe America will reform its institutions, reindustrialize, build nuclear, build drones, fighting China. Okay, we're fighting Iran. Is that not good enough? If it takes 500,000 troops to invade, look, we're fighting Iran. If we were so dead set on fighting China to reindustrialize America, this is easy mode, right? We should be able to do it. So I think pressing go on that would actually do great things. And then America would be more powerful after the war, not because it won the war, but because it would have systematically made all the changes necessary to be capable of winning a war against a true peer adversary like China. Iran is not a peer adversary, but it is a country of over 90 million people with a lot of manufacturing and production, low-tech stuff, but stuff that's not outdated, right? Those Shahed drones are low-tech, but they are contemporary weapon systems. A U.S. aircraft carrier might be high-tech, but is an obsolete weapons platform. So really, high-tech and obsolete actually benefits no one. That's like a battleship during World War II, right? It's the last generation's high-tech weapon. And again, if you prepare yourself so that you can win this war, you have as much nuclear built as possible. You actually build as much clean coal as you can, or not clean. It doesn't matter. We're winning a war. You speed through the electric vehicle transition. And in this process, you've built a lot of new American infrastructure. You built a lot of manufacturing facilities. You're building drones, electric cars, nuclear power plants. That in itself is an accomplished American reindustrialization, right? And sure, it's going to cost a few $1 trillion, but compared to trillions of dollars in stimulus that never achieved this goal, we have printed so many trillions of dollars, papering over the pretense that we didn't stab the economy and shut it down during COVID, and the pretense that we've not done only disastrous policy ever since. Can't we print $5 trillion and just build things with it? And just do so directly with a clear sight for the efficiency of winning a particular war. I think actually this war, here's a fun one. Maybe the only way to discipline US Congress and bully them into action is to fight Iran. So a live player like Donald Trump might actually reach the conclusion, actually, Congress seems to not care about anything else, but they do seem to care about fighting Iran. Well, Congress, if you want us to win against Iran, you have to empower me to do these things. You have to empower my administration to do these things. Build nuclear, build drones, build electric vehicles. And for a final one, this is something I would recommend to people looking at development of technology. We should be trying to develop all chemical processes possible to make it as easy as possible to both use coal as a plastic feedstock and even use coal liquefaction to turn coal into fuel. It's not 1942 or 44 anymore. Whatever Germany did during World War II, we can do much better. There's been 70 years of technological progress since. When their fuel supplies ran out, they were able to, use coal processed to synthesize fuel. We could do that today as well. And in fact, in China, they've already started, like I said, substituting certain kinds of plastics to now be made out of coal when you process coal into the right material. This will destroy and reduce oil demand. And it doesn't matter if it's not competitive at $100 per barrel. If we can get just synthetic coal prices to be competitive at $250 or $200 per barrel, that has eliminated so much leverage from America's enemies, be it Russia or Iran, or maybe one day Venezuela again, if Venezuela, turns out to be less pacified than was assumed. So yeah, those are the sectors I would focus on. High energy build out so that we can continue the data centers, because Erik, let's be real. Currently, data centers are powered by natural gas. If global energy prices spike, this means that OpenAI and Anthropic and Google are competing for their natural gas with Europe and Japan. And while, again, maybe that's an okay competition, let's again be real. Europe and Japan can afford quite a bit. They can throw quite a bit of money to buy natural gas from the United States and ship it over. And that just means that the expenses of building more data centers go up. That's why we need to now actually go nuclear. That's why we need to do as much solar as we can. And, this will reduce the sort of energy demands of natural gas. It will reduce our dependency on it. Because again, gas isn't as globalized as oil, but because of the war, it's continental scale. But because of the war between Russia and Ukraine in Europe, and our allies both in Europe and in East Asia, they've been buying a lot of liquefied natural gas from U.S. Allies in the Middle East and from the United States itself. So we should reduce our domestic demand as much as possible, increase our production, and then suddenly U.S. energy exports become a tool of U.S. energy policy. And of course, we should pressure all of the allies. There's a saying that the U.S. president is dictator of the world, but the mayor of America. Canada, I'm sorry, bro. You're gonna have to export a lot of energy, or else. You better build that pipeline, or else. You better frack, or else. Okay, that makes it better for America, right? We'll buy their energy. Our allies will buy their energy. And, I think that's kind of it's a very muscular policy. It would take a very live player approach. It's still a very national interest or nationalistic policy, but it's very ambitious. The bad news is, again, it's very ambitious. The good news is, in a way, Iran is like easy mode. Like, do you think China wouldn't have closed global straits with its missiles? It wouldn't have caused damage to energy infrastructure, even in the Middle East, if they could. All of these things were priced in a way. So really, this is I think potentially this might be either America's beginning of this recovery, this reindustrialization, or it might be the just a very big humiliating defeat that pushes the U.S. back.
well articulated.
Well, I think this is stuff we're going to have to do either way, is what I'm saying, eventually. So might as well do it now.
Totally. Well,
Either before the ceasefire
yeah,
or after the ceasefire. It doesn't matter. If we do a ceasefire right now, we should do the exact same things anyway, because
yeah,
we'll still be weak and dependent in this way.
yeah. Gearing towards the conclusion here, you know, for people listening to this who've been persuaded and of sort of the need to do this, that and the timing, are there any other recommendations that we haven't gone through that you would also make, and regarding U.S. Energy independence, and or anything else you want to say before we wrap?
Well, I think we should have started building Venezuelan energy infrastructure yesterday. So, maybe the Iranians can sink our ships. It seems the Venezuelans cannot. So, how fast can we get Venezuelan oil production up? And can a U.S. company profit from that? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good place to wrap. Samo, this has been a awesome conversation, very very timely, and as always, until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Live Players. Please subscribe, leave a review, and check out Samo's excellent newsletter, The Bismarck Brief, for more rigorous analysis of key individuals, institutions, or industries.